The smell of campfire mixed with the crisp fall air and the still of the early morning light. The entire army had made their way through the mountains and into the forested rolling hills that made up the eastern borders of Mythranor. It was a tiring and grueling journey, and Alaric was fast asleep, having been so disturbed by the spectral visitor the night before that he had only been able to fall asleep as light crept back into the world. Birds had already begun to sing their songs as the dark black of the night sky eased into a faint blue. Osric's army had made their encampment at the base of a group of hills on which sat a small village above, and beyond, the vastness of the slate forest loomed before them, dark and brooding. It was the last buffer between Mythranor and the edges of the Goblin lands. And for a moment, all was quiet but for the songbirds welcoming the morning light. Then, a shrill scream broke the silence, startling birds from their perches and waking King Osric's men who were camped closest to the village hillside. Alaric was one of them. He fumbled for his sword, squinting through the dim morning light with heavy eyes. Another scream. It was a woman. As Alaric crawled from his tent, other soldiers and knights were doing the same, and down the hillside, a bloodied woman sprinted towards the encampment, shouting frantically.
My baby! Help! My baby!
Alaric and several other knights leapt forward, making their way to her, and as they crossed the threshold of the last row of tents making up the army's encampment, they could hear more panicked cries from the village above.
My baby! My girl!
Cried the woman, who flung herself onto Alaric, gripping him by his tunic.
Help! It took her!
She shouted frantically.
What did?
Alaric asked, picturing the dark skeletal figure who had appeared to him the night before. But at the top of the hill, a shrill, clear cry rang out.
Wilted Hare!
Suddenly a roar filled the air. The knights who stood with Alaric recoiled and shrank back several paces.
Your child is done for. You'll be too if you don't come with us,
said one of the men. Alaric shot the soldier a furious glare, scolding him with his eyes. But the distraught mother who clung to him cradled Alaric's cheek desperately, guiding his face and his gaze back to hers, pleading with him. And in the next moment, several things happened almost at once. Alaric and the knights were suddenly brought to attention by General Garrick Steelcrest and his guard, who approached the group. Garrick was woefully unaware of the events that were transpiring on the edges of his king's encampment.
Sir Alaric Ehrenland.
Garrick's booming voice brought a momentary hush over the panicked knights and the woman who clung to Alaric. Garrick unfurled a scroll and began to read.
By order of King Osric, ruler of the lands of Mythranor, protector of all mankind and heir to the crown of the first king, you are to be seized and imprisoned for treason, the breaking of a royal oath, and...
Garrick's list of Alaric's crimes were cut short by a panicked flood of terrified villagers who burst over the crest of the hills above and poured down the hillside into the encampment. Amid the panicked cries were terrified wails.
It's a wilted hare!
Another roar burst from the hilltop village above. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Alaric locked eyes with Garrick Steelcrest's cold but alarmed gaze. He then looked back to the eyes of the woman who still gripped his collar, her eyes full of tears. Alaric took a deep breath.
Stay here,
he whispered to the woman. He pushed her aside, sprinting forward, putting distance between himself and Garrick, who ran after him, ordering him to stop. His guards followed close behind. Alaric didn't listen. He ran against the panicked crowd that spilled down the hillside, willing himself towards what he knew was almost certain death. And at last, when he crested the top of the hill and stepped into the village square, he saw it, the Wilted Hare. Gangling and grotesque, it stood 15 feet above the ground on two hind legs. Emaciated and dark, the creature was covered in purple hair that sprouted up from exposed muscles, tendon, and bone. In its clutches was the limp body of a small girl, and Alaric could see a head of thick brown hair that matched the woman's who had been pleading with him for help just moments before. This must be her daughter. The creature's hollow eye sockets gaped at Alaric. A light purple haze wafted up from the creature like steam. With an almost lazy movement, the creature released the girl, dropping her unmoving body onto the cobblestone street below. The creature's gaze now fixed on Alaric, who glanced down at the young girl. She was still, but he could see her chest rising and falling. She was alive, for now, and if she was to stay that way, Alaric could see that her survival was in his hands. The Wilted Hare took a twitching, lurching step towards him. Alaric edged towards the beast, keeping his gaze locked on the hulking, lurching mass of decaying flesh and sinew, attempting to place himself between it and the young girl. But then, with a sudden burst of speed, the creature lunged. Alaric drew and swung his sword in a desperate sweeping arch, steel meeting bone with a sickening crunch as he parried the creature's attack. The impact jarred his arm and the creature let out a shrill, rasping grunt. Purple, smoky haze billowed from the wound, filling Alaric's lungs with the stench of decaying flesh and something else. His mind began to stray and weaken. A mad fear was taking hold within his head and his heart. He could see Elowen. He could hear her screams. His vision blurred. Alaric's heart caught in his throat. He tried to steady himself. He knew this was an effect of the Wilted Hare's cursed nature. The noxious fumes emitted from its body could drive men mad. Alaric's vision tunneled. It darkened at the edges. But through the darkness, Alaric could still make out the Wilted Hare circling him, eyeing him with its dead stare. Alaric took a steadying breath, but the Wilted Hare attacked again, striking faster than Alaric could respond. The creature's claws raked against his armor, knocking him backward. He felt his sides split open beneath the metal of his armor that had torn like paper beneath the creature's claws. Alaric collapsed to his knees, clutching the wound. He could feel the soft, wet warmth of his organs, but then something else moved beneath his fingers. His cloak had entered the wound, healing his flesh with a white-hot agony that drove away the darkness that had begun to form in the peripherals of his vision. Every fiber of Alaric's being screamed in protest as the magic of the cloak knit his torn flesh back together. He forced himself up. The Wilted Hare was still circling. The mist emanating from the beast filled his mind again with a dizzying fog and bouquet of rotting flesh. And in this moment, Alaric became aware of a spectator who had appeared on the town square. It was the skeletal hooded figure from the night before, and he could hear its rattling breath again. And he feared that the figure was here for his life, for his soul. And so Alaric gambled with every last ounce of strength he had left in his body. He swung his sword again with all of his might. The blade circled through the air towards the neck of the beast, but the creature twisted, dodging away from Alaric's sword, and instead the blade connected with the monster's chest. Black tar spewed from the creature's wound, coagulated blood that had stopped flowing ages ago. And yet the beast was unfazed. Alaric knew this creature had once been a living being, an animal likely poached for its horns, its pelt, or claws, and then left to rot in the wilted wood, reanimated by the region's powerful and dark magic. And Alaric knew that his moments were now numbered in seconds. Every attempt he had made to fight the creature off had failed. The beast rocked back on its haunches and leapt forward, striking him again with a ferocity that sent Alaric sailing through the air. Alaric's shoulder landed first, smashing into a still-lit oil lamp outside of one of the thatched roof homes. The oil from the lamp leapt through the air, raining flaming liquid onto the armor on Alaric's arms and on the blade of his sword. And for a moment, the Wilted Hare hesitated. Alaric took no time to question his fortune. Gritting his teeth against the ache of his newly healed wounds, and the fire that was now burning through his armor, he lunged forward. The creature swiped at him in return. Alaric ducked. He swung the flaming sword through the air and it found its mark, finally, slicing clean through the neck of the beast. The flames from his sword seared through the flesh and bone. The creature's head tumbled to the ground, followed by its body, which disintegrated into ash. Alaric staggered. His sword slipped from his hands, clanging to the ground as he hurried to remove his smoking armor on his arm that had been engulfed in flames and oil. Quickly, he covered his now bare arm with his cloak. He felt a low, cooling sensation in the burns on his arm, and he hurried over to the girl, who still lay in the streets. Falling to his knees before her, Alaric scooped her tiny frame into his arms. She stirred. She was alive. Alaric felt a surge of relief as her eyes fluttered open, and Alaric became aware of an audience that had formed. The village was filling back with its residents. The soldiers of Mythranor's army and Garrick Steelcrest's guard were there too. The girl's mother burst through the crowd, tears of joy streaming down her cheeks as she ran to her daughter, hungry arms grasping the child.
Thank you. Thank you.
The little girl began to cry softly, and the soft sound of the villagers beginning to clap trickled through the air. As Alaric gingerly lifted himself to his feet, the village erupted into cheers and applause. He was suddenly surrounded by soldiers and peasants alike. They clapped him on the back, villagers hugged him, and Alaric winced from the pain, grimacing a smile through it all. But as soon as the sounds of joy and celebration began, they subsided. Silence fell over the crowd. Alaric looked apprehensively at General Garrick Steelcrest, who approached him again and spoke.
Guards, seize him.
But an old man from the crowd stepped forward.
Seize him? Did you not see what he has just done? That's my granddaughter. He saved her from a wilted hare. It's not ever been done before as far as I know. Seize a hero? On what grounds?
General Steelcrest shot the man a piercing glare.
On grounds of treason. This man has broken his oath to his king and has taken a lover while in service of the crown, and I suggest you step aside.
The man hesitated but stood his ground.
I only saw one man protecting our village today,
he said defiantly. The tension could be felt throughout the town square, and suddenly there was a flash of steel, a spray of blood, and the man fell to the ground. Shrieks emanated from the surrounding villagers, and Garrick turned his sword on them.
Anyone else foolish enough to question the king's orders will follow this man.
Alaric took in the scene with disbelief and shock. He picked up his sword, apprehensively. His ears began to ring, and the sound of the frightened villagers faded away, and the world around him grew dark and shadowy, as if underwater. And then, the hooded figure from the night before came into focus before him, looming over the body of the man who had just been cut down. The figure stared at Alaric with an ancient hollow gaze.
The earth will drink the blood you spill, and each life you take will be a stone upon your soul.
A chill surged down Alaric's spine.
I'm not here to shed blood. I am many things, but a killer I am not.
Death took a breath that sounded like the sighing of 1,000 souls.
Few men have caught my interest over the ages, Alaric, but all of them have been killers.
Before Alaric could settle on Death's words, his world brightened. His senses returned, but Death remained in his field of vision. Alaric had become aware that during his interaction with this spectral visitor, Garrick Steelcrest's guards had begun to move in on him, seemingly unaware of Death, as they walked right through the figure like a foggy mist that only Alaric could see. And as Garrick's guards rounded on him, a young man clad in silver armor and crimson stepped forward, reaching out to take Alaric into custody. It was in this moment that Alaric's instincts took over. Before he could think, the adrenaline and shock of the morning's events hit Alaric's system, and with a flash his sword sung through the cool morning air, painting a streak of brilliant crimson. Time slowed. Droplets of blood seemingly hung in the air like shattered garnets as Alaric's eyes widened with the realization of what he had just done.
No!
He shouted as the young man fell to the ground. Alaric reached for the soldier who crumpled at his feet. The young man gurgled his last breath as his fellow guards rushed Alaric, drawing their swords. Alaric took what he knew would be his last breath. He could see Death moving in on him with Garrick's guards, gripping the hilt of a spectral blade with bony fingers. Death's empty eye sockets were locked with Alaric's, mirroring his movements, and a chill swept up Alaric's spine, an instinctive understanding that Death was no longer a spectator, but here for his soul. But this couldn't be. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Alaric could see Elowin's face in his mind.
I never meant to break my promise to return to you,
he thought.
I hope it's you that I see when death takes my final breath from me.
Garrick's guards advanced, faces twisted with anger and determination. Alaric held his vision of Elowin in his mind as firmly as he could. He wanted her to be the last thing he saw, up to the very last moment. And then chaos erupted. With a flash and a clang, the first soldier sprang at Alaric, but Alaric deflected and struck back, Finding his mark, scarlet rain pebbled Alaric's face. But as the fight began, Alaric noticed something peculiar. In those brief moments, Death's own blade had swept through the air in perfect unison with his, cleaving a spectral path where Alaric's sword had struck, tearing the guard's soul from his body. And Alaric finally understood. Death had not drawn his blade for him. Death was here to reap the harvest that Alaric was about to sow. Another guard lunged, his blade scraping against Alaric's chest plate, but he deflected, shifting his weight into his own attack. Finding his mark, and Death mirrored the blow, severing the man's spirit from his flesh. Alaric moved easily, as he had done so many mornings in the royal gardens as Elowyn watched him train, and now he recited the same dance he had once practiced alone, this time with a new partner. Each step he took aligned with Death's sweeping strikes. Their motions were intertwined in grisly harmony. The villagers watched in horror at the carnage that was suddenly spilling out at their feet. In the fray, one guard lost his footing on a rolling helmet still containing its owner's head. The guard stumbled into the crowd of villagers, striking an elderly woman with the hilt of his sword as he tried to catch his balance. Her husband, infuriated, angrily shoved the guard away, only to be cut down himself by another of Garrick's men. Alaric, who saw all of this, feeling that it stemmed from his actions, felt a desperate need for the bloodshed to come to an end.
Stop!
He shouted, his voice raw with desperation.
These people have done nothing!
But his pleas fell on deaf ears. Garrick's guards pressed forward, forcing him back, their eyes cold and unyielding. Alaric swung his sword again, cutting down another man, and Death was there, reaping his soul with cold apathy. Blood spilled across the ground in such quantities that it stained the cobblestone path and mixed with dirt to form a rusty mud as Alaric fought his way through the mass of men that he had called his own just minutes ago. But now he knew he was an exile. He would never go back home, and as his wounds mounted, he found that his cloak was healing them more slowly. It seemed tired. The pain of his wounds and the healing from the cloak was agony. Yet he fought on, and Death moved in perfect time with him, harvesting souls in cold silence as Alaric fought for his life. The savagery of Alaric's display of swordsmanship sent tremors through the ranks of soldiers and guardsmen who had accompanied General Garrick to the village. And there was another concern growing amongst Garrick's men. It was the villagers themselves, residents who were now beginning to murmur. Their fear was giving way to anger, watching the king's own men cut down their townsfolk with brutal indifference. After all, these men had sworn to protect the inhabitants of Mythranor, but here they were, killing them, and Alaric's resistance to all of this gave them courage. Some began to throw stones. Shouts erupted, and the possibility of a potential uprising from the villagers gave Garrick's guards pause, and it gave Alaric an opening. He turned and ran, darting towards the dark forest on the edge of the town. If he stayed, more would die. He would die, and with one last desperate strike, he cut through the final guard that stood between him and the slate forest. The man fell to the ground, clutching at his throat, and Death's sword swept through his body, harvesting his soul. Alaric didn't look back. He ran. His cloak trailed behind him. Every muscle in his body ached. His vision tunneled again. He darted towards the woods. Death's skeletal form kept pace with him, studying him as he tumbled through thickets and into the shadows of the wood. Alaric could hear guards shouting behind him, stumbling over one another in pursuit, but he pressed on, leaving only the story of what had unfolded behind him. And the story spread quickly. Soon, rumors had reached the capital, and it was not long after that, in the very walls of Osric's castle, that there were whispers among the nobles about a rogue knight of Mythranor who had slain a wilted hare at least 100 feet tall, and had flooded the streets of a distant town with the blood of 100 of Garrick's best guards. And it seemed that everyone knew the tale, everyone except for the broken young woman who was handmaid to the queen.